Senator George LeMieux was born May 21st, 1969, and he was a former United States Senator here in Florida. He was chairman of the Florida-based law firm of Gunster, Yodley, and Stewart, PA. He served as Chief of Staff to Governor Charlie Crist, was former Deputy Florida Attorney General, and is credited with spearheading Crist's successful campaign for governor. On August 28, 2009, Governor Crist announced that he would appoint LeMieux as senator to replace Senator Mel Martinez, who weeks earlier announced he would resign as soon as Crist announced his successor. As senator, Mr. LeMieux proposed the 2007 solution, a plan to eliminate the deficit by 2013 and cut the national public debt nearly in half by 2020. On Thursday, May 13, 2010, the Senate adopted an amendment to the then pending financial regulatory reform that was authored by Senator LeMieux and Senator Maria Cantwell of Washington. An editorial in the Wall Street Journal applauded the LeMieux amendment, saying its reforms would destroy the government-created ratings cartel, and that Mr. LeMieux wants institutions to do actual due diligence on the assets they hold instead of complying with the law by holding assets with a high rating from Standard & Poor's. LeMieux was involved in high-profile blockage of President Barack Obama's nominee for U.S. Ambassador to Brazil, Thomas Shannon, who has since been confirmed. During his time in the Senate, Senator LeMieux was recognized for his record on pro-business and tax reform. He has received several awards, including a 93% rating from the National Taxpayer Union and the Spirit of Enterprise Award from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. On April 5, 2001, Mr. LeMieux formally announced his candidacy for the United States Senate, seat held by Bill Nelson. Since then, Mr. LeMieux is campaigning on a platform of fiscal responsibility. George LeMieux is a Roman Catholic. He married on October 28, 2000. He and his wife have 3 sons and 1 daughter. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to senatorial candidate Mr. George LeMieux.
Well, good afternoon. Good evening. Good evening. Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you for the nice introduction. Now, you should be able to say LeMieux with the last name like yours. Right? We're going to work on that. I know it's not easy. I'm really pleased and privileged to be here tonight. And I want to first start off by saying thank you. I want to say thank you for your involvement in our country, in our community, in our civic life. I want to thank you for calling out the issues that are important to the people of this country and reminding us of our founding principles. The 9/12 movement, the Tea Party movement, the conservative movement of the last couple of years has been a wake-up bell and a reminder, especially for Republicans, of the principles that this country was founded upon and what we're supposed to stand for. Because what happened in politics, what happened in Washington, is that Republicans started to commit the same sins as Democrats and started to follow the same path of seeing government as the answer to every problem. And I was in the United States Senate when these rallies started, the 9/12 rallies and the Tea Party rallies, when folks came to Washington and started to let their voices be heard and showed their beliefs through their presence on the Mall, in Washington, outside the Capitol. And I can tell you that my colleagues in the Senate didn't know what to do about it. They didn't know what to make of it. And I saw it firsthand, watching them trying to understand what was happening. And what was happening was that the people of this country were standing up for what we believe in. And that's because of you. And because of you, we made some tremendous changes in 2010. And because of you, we will make some more changes in 2012. But I want to say thank you, because but for your efforts and but for the efforts of hundreds of thousands of people like you across this country, we would not have had this historic election that we had last year. And unless we do it again, we won't have the changes that we need to make in 2012. It was said just a moment ago, I was born in 1969. A part of that wasn't said, as I was born here in Florida. I grew up in Fort Lauderdale. My grandfather came to Broward County, to southeast Florida, in 1951. He drove down from Waterbury, Connecticut with 5 kids packed in the back of a 1949 Pontiac. He didn't know anybody, and he didn't have a job. But like most people who've come to Florida, he had a dream of a better life. He worked in the trades. He was a carpenter, worked for some folks for a while, and then eventually started off and founded his own little construction company, LeMieux Construction, built homes for folks. And that's what my dad did. My dad ended up working for my grandfather, and he took on the business. My mom worked for my dad. It was a small business. And they built homes for people in Florida. Now, I thought that that might be something that I would like to do growing up, but my father would have none of it. He didn't want me to work in the hot Florida sun. His goal for me was that I would get to work in the air conditioning. And I have achieved that goal. I went to public school, my wife and I both did, all throughout. And then had the privilege to go off to college and law school, and eventually came back to Florida. Started practicing law at the same law firm I'm with today. And got involved in politics, involved with Republican politics. I was a teenage Republican president, a college Republican president, a young Republican president, and then I was the chairman of the Broward County Republican Party, which is like being the one-eyed man in the Valley of the Blind. It's a tough place to be a Republican. But we actually did some good things. In 2002, I ran Jeb Bush's successful re-election campaign in Broward. And we had the best result for a Republican that we have had for 20 years. So we showed that it could be done. At the time, about 2002, I was asked by Charlie Crist, who became Attorney General, to be the Deputy Attorney General. My wife Mikey and I were just finished remodeling a house, and we had a baby on the way. And I got this offer to be the Deputy Attorney General, to manage 400 lawyers and law enforcement officers. And after a lot of praying, we did something that was really not smart for my career path, which is we decided to go to Tallahassee. And I thought, well, I'll just do this for a couple of years. I'll do my public service. We had a baby in Tallahassee, our oldest boy. And then I figured after a couple of years, I'd just come back home. But that's not what God had in store for me. And I think all of you have had this experience in life where you take a chance, you do something different, and it leads to a far different path. And that's what happened to me. I was Deputy Attorney General for 3 years, and then when Governor Crist became governor, he asked me to be his Chief of Staff. And I was his Chief of Staff in 2007. After that, I went back into private practice. I did that in 2008 and 2009. And then Senator Martinez resigned. Stepped down with 16 months left. And you might remember that the governor had a process where he interviewed a bunch of folks to see who would go to the Senate. I did not think that I would get picked. I honestly did not. But I got a call one day. And I traveled back up to Tallahassee, and the governor said, I want you to serve the people well in Washington. I didn't tell my wife that I got the call, because I didn't want her to worry. At that point, we had 3 little boys at home. But she met me at the door when I came home, and she was crying. And she was crying not just because she was happy. She was crying because she didn't know what this was going to mean for our family. Moving to Washington, 3 little kids, leaving a job. And she and I also knew something that no one else knew, which is we were going to have another baby. And we ended up having that baby, a little girl, our first little girl, in Washington. But it was an extraordinary privilege to represent you in the United States Senate. We're going to talk about all the problems with our government, and there are plenty to talk about. We could stay here all night. But before I do that, I want to tell you that it was never lost on me what an honor it was to represent you. To represent 18.5 million people in what is still the world's greatest deliberative body As flawed as it is, it's still the world's greatest deliberative body, the United States Senate, where there are only 100 senators, only 2 from every state. And I'll never forget the first time I was on the Senate floor and realized there's only 100 desks. And behind those desks stood men like Henry Clay, and John Calhoun, and Daniel Webster, and Jack Kennedy, and Harry Truman, and that I would get to fulfill that role on your behalf. I felt the responsibility and the weight. And it also was not lost on me that the other guy from Florida, Bill Nelson, wasn't going to be representing our values. So I knew that I was going to have to work extra hard. I went back to the office that first day and said to the staff, I want to get 16 years out of 6 months. 6 years out of 16 months, rather. I want to do all I can to fulfill my obligation to the people of Florida. And we tried to do that. I had a lot of priorities that I tried to get passed. We got 5 priorities passed. I was the most junior member of the United States Senate, the most junior member in the minority party, and we got 5 priorities passed. And it shows that if you will work hard and roll up your sleeves and be serious and thoughtful and respectful to those around you, whether they believe in your views or not, that you can get things done. So I got legislation passed to save us $20 billion a year preventing Medicare fraud. $20 billion a year. Legislation to prioritize exports so our businesses could have more work selling their goods overseas. Legislation to lower taxes on small businesses. The bank issue that was mentioned earlier. And other things. Things to make sure that America stayed strong and secure in the world. And it was a privilege to do it. But as much as a privilege as it was, it is the most broken and bizarre institution I've ever been a part of. And I knew it was bad, and you know it's bad. You watch it on TV, you read. People in this room are far more educated about all of the problems in our government than most people are. But I want to tell you that as bad as you think it is, it's worse. When you see it up close, and you see the fact that the truth is that no one is really in charge. The government is running itself now. It has been set on a course. It is a machine that runs on its own volition. It's as if a snowball started rolling down the hill, and now it picks up size and speed without having to be pushed. Your government has been created to be bigger and bigger each year, to spend more and more. And the status quo in Washington is to add to what you spent last year. I quickly saw this, because one of the first things I had to vote on was a budget. And they don't give you the budget all at once, because then you could start figuring things out. What they do is they present you a specific appropriations bill, a spending bill, on one subject area of government. So say it's housing. You get that bill. And it's 15% more than last year. So someone like me says, I have a background in business, although I've spent time in public life. I've spent most of my time in the private sector. I help run a large private company here in Florida. We only can spend as much money in my business as we take in, just like you and your family. So when I ask them, well, if we're going up 15% here, where are we cutting? And they look at you like, oh, you're the new guy. Because they don't cut. They just add. In fact, you may have heard that it's been some 800 days since the U.S. Congress has passed a budget. Longest time in modern times. They just keep passing these continuing resolutions to fund the government. Well, know this. They never pass a budget. Not in the way that you and I think of a budget. See, we think of a budget as, let's look at how much money we take in, then we'll determine how much money we're going to spend. That's not their budget. Their budget is, let's look at what we spent last year and add to it. They do not look at revenues when they determine expenditures. That's not a budget. So the bureaucracy grows. And I want you to know that your members of Congress don't know what the money's being spent on. What happens is people will show up and say, I want to make sure that the hungry get food. Well, that's a laudable thing. It's probably not the role of the federal government. But you can understand that they have a lot of ideas. They stand up and say, okay, we're going to have a new program. But they don't realize we already have 90 programs to feed the hungry. The duplication and the redundancy and the bureaucracy, it grows and it grows and it grows. And now, it threatens our way of life. Because we're in a situation now where the spending of the federal government is going to crash our economy. And we as Americans, we as believers of our founding principles have to focus on this. And it's why this election is so important. Because we're not going to have too many elections more to fix this problem. In fact, I believe if we don't fix this problem in the next 2 to 3 years, we will not be able to fix it. And here are the facts. Your nation is $14.6 trillion in debt. It is headed towards $26 trillion in debt by the end of the decade. Now you hear these numbers, trillions. It's not just T in front of a different illion. Trillions, billions, millions. You know, the joke in Washington is don't tell Obama what comes after a trillion. A trillion is exponentially bigger than a billion. What do I mean by that? I'm going to give you some helpful ways, at least they are for me, to understand how much money we're talking about. $1 million is 1,000,000. Okay, that's something you could put your brain around, I think. Take $1 bills and put them on the floor. Carpet this floor with $1 bills. $1 million covers 2 football fields. Okay? You can picture that in your head. $1 billion is 1,000 million. $1 billion in $1 bills covers Key West, Florida. 3.4 square miles of $1 bills. If you've ever been to Key West, Florida, picture Duval Street with $1 bills going down. Stranger things have happened in Key West. $1 trillion is 1,000 billion, or 1,000,000 million. Those $1 bills cover Rhode Island twice. It is an enormous amount of money. An even more staggering way to think about it, Pastor. If you were to spend $1 million a day since the birth of Jesus Christ till today, you would not get to $1 trillion. $1 million a day from the birth of Christ. It is an enormous amount of money. And your government is spending more than $1 trillion a year than it's taking in. That's the deficit. Difference between the debt and deficit. The deficit is what we spend more than what we take in any particular year. The debt is the accumulation of that deficit over time. This year, $1.5 trillion deficit. Next year, $1.6 trillion deficit. National debt's 14.6, headed to 26 trillion. Why does this matter to you besides the fact that these are big numbers? It matters to you because, like any family who spends more than they take in for too long, any business who spends more than it takes in, any church that spends more than it takes in, there is a day of reckoning. Right. There is a point where the bank says, we're not going to loan you the money anymore. There's a day when the bank cancels the credit card. That day is coming for the United States of America. We are spending $200 billion a year on interest payments. Yeah. Next year it's $260. In 2020, it's $900. It's cascading, my friends. Your country can't make a $900 billion interest payment. Sometime between now and 2020, if we don't stop the spending, the world will figure out that we can't make our interest payment. And what's happening in Greece, and in Portugal, and in Spain, and in Ireland is going to happen here. And if you pick up a newspaper and see the pictures of the folks throwing Molotov cocktails in Athens, Greece, we can't let that happen here. Right. Now, we're not going to fix this problem by continuing to send to Washington career politicians. Exactly. The normal path for a United States Senator is someone serves in the State House, then the State Senate, then they go to the U.S. House, and then they cap off their career in the United States Senate. That's why we've gotten to where we are.
Right.
People who've never been in the real world. Not that they're bad people, they just don't have the experiences to know that you just can't spend money like this. And we've got to make a change. Didn't Einstein say the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result?
Yes.
So if you send Bill Nelson back to Washington, guess what you're going to get? Exactly what you've gotten now. If you send a career politician, even as a Republican, to Washington, D.C., they're not going to think that this is strange or unusual because they don't have anything to test it against. No real life experience. We've got to make a change. Now, when I was there, I saw this happen firsthand. I thought I was the only crazy person there. I wanted to scream to the rafters every day, why are we spending money this way? So what I did is, not only did I introduce a balanced budget amendment, but I offered a solution called the 2007 solution. And it's simply this. If your government would go back to what we were spending 3.5 years ago, in 2007, the height of the economy, before the recession, when tax receipts were really good. I'm not saying live off the lean years. I'm saying live it off the money when the tax receipts were good because the economy was humming. Shouldn't we be able to live off of what we were doing when the tax receipts were good, when the economy was good? If we were to do that and cap all federal spending, and I mean everything, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, defense, everything, at 2007 levels,
Yes.
you would balance the budget in 2 years.
Yes.
And you would cut the national debt in half by the end of the decade. My friends, it's not rocket science. But even the Ryan plan, and I admire him for his courage, even the Ryan plan only cuts $6 trillion. Now you say only $6 trillion. It cuts $6 trillion of the money we're going to go into debt in the future. It doesn't cut anything out of the 14.6. So instead of getting to from 14.6 to 26, he gets us to 20. We're still going to go broke at 20. We've got to stop spending now. Now you hear, if you listen to the radio, they're watching television, that there's this debate right now where the President, the Speaker, Reid, McConnell are all meeting about what we're going to do about the debt ceiling. You need to watch this very carefully.
We are not allowed.
And make sure that we don't enter into some bad deal, because that's where it feels like we're going. It feels like they're going to enter into some tax increase with some promised spending cuts in 6 or 7 years. Isn't it always the way we enter into these deals? The tax increase is tomorrow, the spending decrease never comes.
Right.
We got to cut spending today.
Right.
We need to cap federal spending.
Yeah.
The only way you're going to get members of Congress to be disciplined is to tell them, Congress, you shall not spend more money than X. Pick a number. Tie it to GDP, make it a hard cap, whatever it is, cap it. I voted for spending caps when I was in Washington. We got to cap spending. It's the only way that you will force them to set priorities. These agencies in government, no one knows what they're spending their money on. They're funding the priorities to the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Unless you tell somebody you can only spend this much money, it's like going out to eat with somebody else's credit card. You're just going to order whatever you want. That's what they've been doing for 40 years. So we have to cap. We have to cut. We have to cut today. We have to have a balanced budget amendment. Now the problem with the balanced budget amendment is it takes 2/3. And we don't have the votes. So while I'm for it, when you hear politicians talking about we got to balance the budget, realize it takes 67 votes in the United States Senate to pass a constitutional amendment. And we're not even close to that. We have 47. So what we have to do today, in the real world, in real time, is cut and cap. And then we got to pass a balanced budget amendment when we send more people to Washington. That's our financial situation. It is dire, it is critical, and we've got to make changes.
Right, exactly.
I want to talk about the world a little bit. Talk about our standing. Under this president, we treat our enemies like our friends, and our friends like our enemies. And it's got to stop. Because we are viewed as being weak in the world. and our friends don't know where they stand with us. I had a chance, when I served you in the United States Senate, to sit on the Armed Services Committee. And I had a chance in that setting to work with our men and women in uniform. Our 22 military bases in Florida, as well as working with our men and women around the world. I spent time with them in Afghanistan. I spent time with them at our embassy in Pakistan. In Djibouti, Africa, which is across the Straits of Yemen, from Yemen. And I've been to Yemen too. Probably the most dangerous place in the world right now. And in Latin America, where our troops are and our military advisors are helping our friends in Colombia and Panama. It's a very dangerous world. And it's not going to get any less dangerous. And we can't have any illusions about the fact that there are people out there who don't believe in our way of life. There are people out there who want to kill us. There are people out there who want to spread a radical, fanatical vision of the world. And we must be vigilant. You might have seen the news reports today that Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, that's the Al-Qaeda branch that's in Yemen, is working upon trying to figure out a way to implant explosives into people so that they can evade detection and then detonate the person. Not just the underwear like they tried with Abdul Muttalib, the Christmas Day bomber, but the person. We must continue to be vigilant. And in terms of our friends, we cannot be telling our friends like in Israel that we're going to ask them to commit suicide by going back to their pre-1967 borders. If I get a chance to go back and serve you again in the Senate, I'm going to stand up for our friends. We don't need a foreign policy, we need a freedom policy. If you believe in our values, if you believe that our rights were given to us by God, as is said in our Declaration of Independence, if you believe in the rule of law, the right to worship freely, the right to criticize your government, the right to select the people that govern you, then you're our friend. And we're going to support you. And if you don't believe in those rights, you're going to have to work to have a friendship with us. You're going to have to earn your way. We can't just be the neutral arbiter in all these disputes around the world. We got to stand with our friends. So my friends, these are critical times. And we have a big election coming up. We've got to replace this president and all the people that come with him. It shouldn't be lost on any of us. It's not just the person who occupies 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. It's all of the people that come with him, who go to the EPA, who are trying to shut down our farms, who are trying to shut down our commercial fishermen, the people at the National Labor Relations Board who are suing Boeing. Boeing's trying to create 1,000 jobs in South Carolina, and they are suing them, saying they're violating union laws to prevent them from creating jobs. You know, it's not just the president, it's the people who come with him. And we got to take the U.S. Senate back.
That's right.
Yes.
We did 1/3 of the job in 2010 with the House. We got to finish the job. It's 53-47 in the Senate. Every day, Bill Nelson is voting and canceling out Marco Rubio. Every day. Now, Bill Nelson's going to come back to Florida and talk about being a fifth-generation Floridian and use his southern accent and talk about the fact that he's a moderate. Don't be fooled. Don't be fooled. He is a solid and liberal and reliable vote for Harry Reid and the policies that are putting this country on a path of financial ruin and laws that are killing jobs all over Florida, from Obamacare to the Dodd-Frank Act to bloated budgets to stimulus and things that have put such a burden on our businesses that they can't hire new people. This is as tough of a time in Florida as any of us have ever lived through. It's the worst economy in 70 years. We got to do something different. We got to get government off the backs of businesses.
Yes.
Businesses got to have some economic certainty so they can feel like they want to hire people again. I hear it every day from businesses across Florida. Too many taxes, too many regulations, too many mandates. I don't know what the landscape is, therefore I'm not hiring. And our people are suffering. Average family in Florida, mom and dad in Florida, average salary is $50,000 a year. And mom and dad, most likely one of them has lost a job and has maybe working 2 or 3 jobs that aren't as good as the one good job that they have. And our people are upside down on their houses, behind on their mortgage payments, or they're in foreclosure. 24% of all the foreclosed properties in America are in Florida. If you want to keep the same results, keep sending the same people to Washington. I don't think you want that.
Right. Absolutely.
No.
We got to beat Bill Nelson. Now, I'm running for this office. I got to tell you, it's not personally the smartest thing for the LeMieux family. 4 little kids, 85, 3 and 14 months, a good job running a big business in Florida, and people still call me senator. So why on earth would I want to do this again? I want to do it because I feel a calling. I feel a calling to try to go back to Washington to right the ship, save our country from our government,
Yes.
and make sure that our children, my children, and your grandchildren live in as great of a country as the one that we inherited. I don't want my kids to have a diminished life. I don't want them to grow up in America that's second best. I don't want your kids to experience that. I don't want your grandkids to experience that. That's our obligation. And that's the calling I feel. Now look, there's some other folks in this race, besides me on the Republican side. And they're not my opponents. They're competitors. And I'm not here to talk down about any of them, because we're all Republicans, and any one of us would be better than Bill Nelson. But I believe I'm the best guy to beat Bill Nelson. And I want to tell you why, and I want to tell you some of the differences between me and the other folks that are running. I'm the only candidate in this race who's held office, who's never voted for a tax increase. My friends who served in the state legislature who are running for this voted for billions of dollars in tax increases. I think you should remember that. Because in 2013, the next senator from Florida, when dealing with these debt issues, there is going to be tremendous pressure to raise taxes. And if you've pulled the lever before to raise taxes, I'd be worried that you'd pull the lever again. Number 2, I'm the only candidate in this race who's held office, who's never asked for an earmark. What's an earmark? An earmark is when a legislator writes money in the budget, the bacon. You've heard of bringing home the bacon? Bringing home the bacon for their hometown or their home state? I've never done it. Let me tell you why. I saw what it does. It's not that those projects in and of themselves are bad necessarily. They can be. But a sewer treatment plant here or a bridge there, it's not that they're bad, but they buy you off. Because when you get your project in that bill that's 15% more than last year, you got to vote for that bill because your project's in it. And if you vote against the bill with your project in it, you'll never get a project again. That's the way they buy people off in Washington. I never asked for an earmark. If you send me back, I never will. And I'm the only candidate in this race who can say that. The third thing is, I actually served in the United States Senate. You don't have to guess what I'm going to do if I go back. I have a conservative record. I got 100% from the Chamber of Commerce. I got a 92 rating from the American Conservative Union. I got a 93 rating from the National Taxpayers Union. Got the Taxpayer Hero Award. Got the Tax Fighter Award. I got 100% from the Family Research Council. I got 100% from the Christian Coalition. If you want somebody who has a conservative record in the U.S. Senate, I'm the only person in this race who's demonstrated in this position that I'm running for that I have a conservative record. Everybody in this campaign is going to tell you how conservative they are. I'm the only one who has a conservative record in the U.S. Senate. And I'm happy to compare my record in the U.S. Senate against my competitors' records in the state legislature. My record is far more conservative. Fourth thing is this. I'm the only person in this race who's going to beat Bill Nelson. Let me tell you why. He is not going to be easy to beat. He's going to raise a ton of money, and he's going to masquerade as a moderator. And that general election is only 60 days. And you better have somebody who can stand on stage who has the stature to be able to face Bill Nelson and hold him accountable. And I was there. And I have a senator in front of my name as well. And I'm going to be able to say to the people of Florida, look, there are two distinct choices here. If you want a guy who voted for Obamacare, vote for him. If you want a guy who fought against it, vote for me. If you want a guy who voted for financial regulation, which is crippling our banks and the ability to lend money to businesses, and putting too many regulations on too many businesses. He voted for Dodd-Frank. I voted against it. Want a guy who wanted to try the 9/11 terrorists in New York City? There's your man. I voted against it. Want a guy who's never offered a balanced budget and who's been in Congress as long as we've had a financial crisis? Bill Nelson has had his hands on the wheel, or me, who came forward with an honest-to-goodness solution to balance the budget in 2 years. That's a clear difference, and I can make that case. There will not be a stature gap if I'm on the stage with Bill Nelson. Last thing, and then I want to answer your questions. You're going to hear from at least one of my opponents that you can't vote for me because I work for Charlie Crist. We all supported Charlie Crist.
I didn't.
Well, you were one of the few. He had a 70% approval rating. He won the Republican primary by 33%. No one was more disappointed than I was when he went to the left. It was after I left that he went to the left. And the day after he left the Republican Party, I endorsed Marco Rubio.
That's right.
It was not an easy thing for me to do, but it was the right thing for me to do. So if you want someone who's going to do something that's hard and something that's difficult and stand by their principles, even when it's not easy, then I think I'm your man. You've been very gracious tonight in allowing me to speak to you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. God bless you.
Okay. Okay. The first one is the FDA Food Safety Moderation Act represents a threat to local food movement, states' autonomy to regulate food, and the country's ability to become self-sufficient in food production. The Act greatly expanded the power of FDA, an agency that does not respect our freedom of food choice. The FDA has stated as a matter of public record that people have no fundamental right to their own physical and bodily health, and no fundamental right to obtain any food they wish. Passage of the Act into law enabled the FDA potentially to regulate all farms marketing food products direct to consumers, even if the farms engage only in interstate commerce. The raid on an Amish farm for unpasteurized milk is an excellent example. Moreover, FDA has proven itself untrustworthy to operate in the best interest of the American public, as clearly seen in allowing the non-therapeutic use of antibiotics in animals and its lax policy regarding genetically modified foods. You voted in favor of this act. What is your justification for further expanding government's control over our lives with the foods and natural supplements we choose to consume?
Thank you for the question. The food safety bill was a bill that I did vote for. It was not a perfect bill. We had a Republican version of the bill by Senator Coburn that I voted for, which was a better version. I think just a little. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
The Coburn amendment was better, and I voted for it, but it didn't pass. So I was left with the decision of whether to vote for a bill that wasn't perfect or vote against the food safety bill. Let me give you the reasoning that I used to make the decision that I would vote for the bill. We have the FDA now. This was not creating the FDA. This was updating a law that was 70 years old. The food safety is, within my belief, in the constitutional authority of the United States Congress under Article 1, Section 8. It is an interstate commerce issue. Our food cannot be policed by 50 different states. We're not going to have a food border, Florida border patrol for food, and then with Georgia, then with Alabama. That doesn't work. We saw at the time that this bill was passed that we were having problems with food safety. You remember the Iowa egg problem at the time, where folks were getting salmonella. As a dad with 4 little kids, food safety is something that I'm concerned about. Now, something that was mentioned in the question was fixed in the final version of the bill. And it was something that I worked on to make sure it was fixed. There is an amendment in the bill from John Texter that changes the restrictions on local farms. So if you are shipping food within 500 miles, going to a farmer's market, or are doing small transactions, small deliveries of food, you do not come under the auspices of this new law. So we wanted to make sure that family farmers and folks who had bringing food to a farmer's market were not going to be caught up in some crazy federal regulation. This is basically for food that's coming to your supermarket, a lot of which is coming from other parts of the country or from other countries. Not a perfect bill, but on balance, I thought it was the right thing to do.
Okay. As our Florida Senator, what will you do to fight public corruption in a state that is usually at the top of the national corruption list?
It's a great question. We unfortunately probably have one of the most corrupt states for public officials in the country. I think that Governor Christ had to suspend more people from office due to corruption than any governor had before. And every day it seems like you pick up the newspaper and there's another public official that's on the take. We need to make sure that our federal prosecutors, and they've been doing a lot where I'm from in Southeast Florida, are prosecuting people who are violating the law. But this is a symptom of people spending a career in politics. Our founding fathers never intended for people to spend their whole life in government. What was intended is you'd be like Washington. You'd serve, and then you come home to your plow. And I will assure you that if I have the honor of going back, I'm not staying in Washington forever. I'd like to go back, help fix these problems, specifically on the fiscal side, right the ship, and then after that's done, I'm going to come home. And I'm going to be in private life, and I'm going to live under the laws that I help pass. Because people who are there forever, who spend their whole career, get tempted by this money that surrounds politics. I talked about earmarks before. At best, earmark is just a flattering thing for a legislator to bring home a project to their hometown so they put their name on it. School, bridge, water treatment plant, whatever it is. At worst, it's corruption. At worst, that money is appropriated to somebody who puts that money back in their pocket. So one of the things that I will do, and I said before, is I will never request an earmark. Because at their worst, they're a soft form of corruption.
Next question. You voted for the bullet train because the dollars would go elsewhere if we didn't take it. But how do you really feel about the high-speed rail and bullet trains being funded by the government?
I did not vote for the bullet train, just to clarify that. What happened is the stimulus was passed. It's before I got to Congress. If I was in Congress, I would not have voted for the stimulus. Once the money was appropriated, passed by Congress, put out to the Department of Transportation, the plan came forward that the money was going to go to Florida for the high-speed rail, at least a portion of it, the first $2 billion or so. Now, I voted to repeal all of the unspent stimulus money. What I think we should do is take all the money that hasn't been spent, at that time it was about 40%, and bring it back to Washington and pay down the debt. Stimulus didn't work. $787 billion, only $50 billion of it was really what you would call stimulus, in terms of roads, bridges, things like that. The rest of it was unemployment compensation, money to shore up states, and all sorts of pent-up spending projects in Washington that did nothing to stimulate the economy. Just a big spending bill. We voted to repeal all the unspent money. We didn't pass it. We didn't have enough Republicans in the Senate. So here's where we are. The money can go to Florida, or the money can go to another state. Now, it is good rhetoric, and it would be smart politically, and Brian, my campaign manager, probably would like it if I would say this. For me to just say, I've changed my mind, rail's bad, we shouldn't take the money, Governor Scott did the right thing. I disagree. And here's why. Those dollars are going to another state. There's not a choice of sending them back to pay down the debt. The honest discussion here is, do you want the money spent in Florida, or do you want the money spent in New York, or California, or another state? I thought it would be better to spend the money here. But this is what I would have done if I were governor. I would have looked at the project. I would have done a study. If a private company would have come in and paid for the state's share, I would have done the deal. If the state would have been on the hook for the $300 million, I wouldn't have done it. And that's where I stand on rail.
When we call congressional offices, they don't seem to listen. How do you recommend framing a comment to be taken seriously?
Well, I hope we listen. And one thing that we pride ourselves on is we got back to everybody, called people and emailed them and really tried to seek your input. I think you should communicate with your members of Congress. The best thing to do is to send an email or write a letter. Now, if you do one of these deals where there's a prepackaged email or a prepackaged letter and you add your name to it, you know what happens then is they come to you and say, Senator, 1,800 people sent this letter. That's not as effective as you writing your own letter. So if you write your own letter, if you send your own email and you draft it in your own words, I think that's the best way to get heard.
What can we do to protect our Medicare program for senior citizens? Why is Congress not cutting the budget more so we are not in debt? Please do not vote to raise the debt level.
Okay. Let's talk about Medicare and the debt level and what we need to do. 85% of the budget is Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and defense. So when someone says, I'm going to cut discretionary spending in order to balance the budget, that's only 15% of the budget. You can't balance the budget by cutting the 15% piece of the pie. You've got to deal with the whole pie. And 5% of that pie are those four things. Medicare is becoming the biggest part of that. So any discussion about balancing the budget has to deal with Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and defense. And we as Republicans, in order to be credible, we have to talk about defense. If we as Republicans say, oh, we'll talk about entitlements, but we won't talk about defense, we're never going to get anything done. What I would do under my 2007 plan of going back to all of our expenditure levels at 2007 is that I would look at Social Security and Medicare. I would take a page from what Senator Rubio has proposed. We have to ensure that Medicare and Social Security is there for seniors, especially seniors who are taking it now or folks who are about to be able to take it the next few years. If we do nothing, Medicare in about 12 years will not be able to make all of its payments. So doing nothing is saying to seniors, Medicare is going to fail for you. That's what the Democrats are at. Do nothing. Demonize us, make the Republicans look like we're evil, meta-scare tactics. But the truth is, doing nothing means people will not get their benefits, and as little time as 12 years, things will start to diminish. So what we need to do, in my view, is in order to ensure Medicare and Social Security for people who are on it now, or who will be on it soon, is we have to say, folks that are 55 and younger, me included, we're going to have to work longer, raise the retirement age, and we're going to have to means test it. What does means testing mean? That means for people under 55, if you're making good money in retirement, you're going to get less. Now, I wish it was the case that I didn't have to tell you that that's what we have to do. Because you've been told your whole life that you've paid in to Social Security insurance, and you've paid into Medicare, and these programs are going to pay back out to you. The problem is you've been lied to. There are no dollars set aside. Your money that you paid in is not there. Congress spent it. They're Congress. They make the laws. They shouldn't have done it. It was wrong. They spent all the money. So all of the money that you paid in is gone. And all that is there is a big IOU. And why are we borrowing money from foreign countries now? Because there's no more money left in Social Security and Medicare to steal. That's why they're going to China and Japan and borrowing all these dollars, because they can't take it from the Social Security Trust Fund. So the truth of it is this is not a program you're paying into, it's just tax. And this is a safety net. I want to make sure that we keep the safety net for our seniors and folks who are going to be seniors soon. But for the rest of us, we're going to have to work longer. Look, when we started Social Security, the average life expectancy was 65. When did you get your benefits? 65. People are living into their 70s, 80s, and 90s, which is wonderful. But we can't expect people of my generation to retire at 65 anymore and keep these programs solid. So we got to change it for those of us who are younger, to preserve it for those who are older.
Can I just say something, Senator?
Yes,
I'm
ma'am.
48 years old, and I have absolutely no problem, and I know I speak for a lot of people in this room, I have absolutely no problem not receiving or Medicare, period. And I think a lot of citizens in this country are willing to sacrifice those benefits to save our nation.
Oh, God bless you.
And spread that message, because it's not being heard. I'm 7 years away and saying, great, take it. If it saves our country, take it.
Thank you.
I'm with her on that, Senator LeMieux. He's right.
Sorry.
The life insurance industry will tell you that 98% of Americans can't retire without public assistance. So if you look at the amount of money it takes for an average person retiring, just the basic minimum amount of money to put a roof over your head and food on the table, they can't do that. So it's a promise that was made to the American people. They've paid this money in, not voluntarily, mandated all their working career, and our elected officials robbed the bank. So many people, especially AARP, is coming out and saying, what is the priority of our country? Where's the benefit to go to the taxpayer? Do we really need to be spending $2 billion a week over in Afghanistan while 17 million American children go to bed hungry at night? It's a matter of priorities. Congress created this problem, and the people are trying to take that authority back and say, listen, you're not listening to the American people. It's not that we want
Thank
this
you very
maximum
much.
benefit
We do
of
want to get on to our other
$2,000 a month.
questions, sir. Thank you.
We'll get to your question, don't worry.
Yes.
I just wanna make it
Senator
clear.
LeMieux, if elected, will you support term limits?
I'm going to support the fact that I'm not going to stay there forever. Let me tell you that I got mixed views about term limits. The problem is we have term limits in Tallahassee now. And all that it has done is made the lobbyists stronger. So there are some good things about term limits. You clean house. You get rid of a lot of people that you need to get rid of. And you know what? That would be great in Washington. The bad news is you throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't want Tom Coburn to ever retire. There's some folks that like to have stay there forever. I can tell you this about me. I will not. I will not stay in the U.S. Senate. You will not see me there when I'm 60, 70 years old. You can have, you've got it on tape.
Just saying.
You can have it in writing, you can have it on tape, whatever. I'm sure that this will be played again in the future if that were ever to come up.
Next question.
Where did Jim Domenici throw out that you get rid of 10 Chuck Schumers?
Oh.
Senator, I know you said you answer to no special interest. Then please explain the $10,000 you received from CSX, the train. Is that why you are for the train? Not taking the money is not a good reason. We can't afford it. Thank you.
I don't know what you're referring to with $10,000 from CSX.
Well, on your follow the money, it shows that you received $10,000 from CSX. That's the train track company, isn't it?
I have not received $10,000 from CSX.
Well, they have it on the...
What you might be referring to is I had a leadership PAC when I was in Washington where I raised money for other Republicans who were running for office. The money didn't go to me.
Under your name.
Yeah, well, it was a leadership PAC that I set up to help elect people like Pat Toomey in Pennsylvania and some of these other Republicans who won. Money that went in to elect members of Congress here in Florida. CSX is a great company. They're headquartered here in Florida, in Jacksonville.
Senator, what in your opinion constitutes victory in Afghanistan? And when should U.S. forces leave?
Well, we need to bring our troops home. But we don't need to bring them home based on a political timetable. What the president said the other day is basically he wants to bring 30,000 troops home before the election. That's the wrong calculus. I want to bring those troops home too. We've got 100,000 folks in Afghanistan. It is very, very dangerous. I've been to Afghanistan. It is the most inhospitable place that you can imagine. It's like fighting on the moon. And it's very difficult. This is not a place where there was civilization. This is a place that's been barbaric and back in time, since Alexander the Great fought there. So it's a very difficult place, and our men and women are doing great work. We need to bring them home when our military leaders tell us it's the right time to bring them home. Now, our military leaders gave the president advice, Secretary Gates, General Petraeus, and it was not to bring 30,000 people home in time for the next election. They did agree to a drawdown. That number is not public, but we need to do it on the scale that works. We're going to have folks there until 2014 or so, and we're probably going to end up having a base there. But we can't just leave tomorrow. As much as I would like to bring them all home now, we are spending a lot of money being there, and we are risking our men and women's lives. But if we leave tomorrow, we will leave it worse than what we found. We had a long war in Iraq, and we have won that war in Iraq. The surge worked. The surge is working in Afghanistan. We've got to leave Afghanistan stable. We are training more of the military police. We are training more of their army. I believe they will be able to take it over. Now we have to think in the future whether we ever occupy a country again. Because I don't think we can afford to do so. But we cannot just leave now. And I am not willing to say that I'm going to agree to the president's timetable. There are others in this race on my side who agree with the president's drawdown approach. I don't.
Okay, this is going to be our final question this evening.
Okay.
Why did you vote against the earmark ban?
I voted for the earmark ban. In fact, I was one of the first people to be against earmarks in the U.S. Senate. I had a press conference with Jim DeMint and 3 or 4 other folks right in the beginning when this first started to take on a life. So I was one of the leaders in being against earmarks. And I never requested an earmark the entire time I was in the U.S. Senate. This issue doesn't get enough attention. These earmarks are a real problem. So I would challenge you all, when you're talking to candidates, remember I'm the only person in this race who's held office who's never requested an earmark. And I think it's something we really need to be focused on. It needs to be one of the questions that folks like you ask candidates all the time. Will you agree not to seek any earmarks?
But they lie to you. They say no, and they lie.
Still ask the question.
Okay, I'm getting a lot of special requests for this, so would you like to ask that question?
Well, I just want to know what your stance is on the immigration issues that we're facing today. I mean, Florida, Arizona.
Look, immigration is a huge problem in this country. We can't afford the programs that we have now, let alone the programs the liberals want, let alone the programs that are paying for people who are here illegally. And our borders are porous. I went to Arizona with Senator Cobb, and I traveled the entire border, from Yuma on the west to Douglas on the east, either on foot, in a Jeep, in a helicopter, or a plane. And I saw what works and what doesn't. We are having success in some places keeping the border secure. In Yuma, they have stopped illegal immigration by 95% in 3 years. By building a big fence, by monitoring that fence, by arresting the people who come over the fence, by trying them and putting them in jail for 90 days, and then re-importing them way back into Mexico, a couple hundred miles, not right back over the border they came over. That's working. Other places like Nogales, city against city, it's not working at all. Much less success. We've got to secure the border. Now, we don't need an Arizona-style immigration law in Florida because we don't have a border problem. We need a Florida immigration solution. Our problem is different. We have people who overstay visas. That's our problem in Florida. We don't have so many Mexicans or folks who are coming over the Mexico border coming across into Florida. We've got people who come here legally, only supposed to stay for a certain period of time, and then just stay here illegally. I believe that every person who goes to get a job in Florida, that their employer should have to check to see whether or not they're here legally or not. I don't know how you can be against that. And the Florida legislature this year failed in passing this. I don't know how we have a Republican-controlled Senate and a Republican-controlled House and a Republican governor and not pass an E-Verify bill. Marco Rubio is supporting this now in Washington to do it federally. If you are here illegally, you need to go home. It's just a simple way about it. The wrinkle in all of this, the hard issue, is the children. That's the hard issue. And we're going to have to deal with that because they didn't commit an illegal act. Their parents did. But for the folks who came here illegally as adults, they need to go home we got to secure the border.
Okay, that concludes our question and answer session. Thank you everyone who submitted questions.